Welcome to the first episode of the Arklay Archives. I am your Resident Evil lore keeper. In this 25th anniversary celebratory video series, I'll be covering all things Resident Evil. For the first episode, we'll look at my top 30 interesting Resident Evil facts, Easter eggs, and observations. In other words, things that appear across many, if not all, of the games. Without further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? If you've played any Resident Evil game, chances are you've seen at least a couple of these bad boys. Yep, valve handles, the lighter, cranks, keys, and crests are all a staple of Resident Evil. In recent years, the bolt cutters also joined the unique item ranks, as every RE game made since RE7 seems to feature them. Oh, bolt cutters, never leave us. If there's one profession I would tell everyone in the RE universe to stay the hell away from, it would be chopper pilots. They almost never make it. They're destined to get shot down, crash, or flee like the cowards they are. Apply for this job at your own risk, denizens of Raccoon City. This one's a no-brainer.
The self-destruct sequence has been activated.
We've all heard the infamous self-destruct sequence being activated as each game nears its climax. Everyone in the RE universe seems to have invested in one of these. Smart move. I get it. We all need a place to vent, rant, and reveal our dark secrets from time to time. But the characters in Resident Evil have a peculiar habit of leaving their journals, letters, and super illegal incriminating documents everywhere for all eyes to see. Wesker, Birkin, next time maybe you guys should invest in a document shredder, private Twitter account, or have you tried fire? When you were younger and you played through some of the older Resident Evil games, you likely saw this in the character bios, in the game manuals, or even if you look closely, in the game inventory screens themselves. Every character's blood type is listed. Did you know that this has to do with a popular belief in Japan where someone's blood type was supposedly tie in with the personality traits or skills of a person? This is similar to how here in the West, astrology has become a ubiquitous way to refer to someone's behaviors and traits. Resident Evil 4 was a groundbreaking game for the games industry in many ways at the time. But have you thought about this one trend it started, at least for the RE franchise itself? Getting locked in a house or cabin and having to fight off hordes of enemies a la Left 4 Dead, or every zombie movie ever, has become quite common. It appears in RE5, RE6, Revelations 2, and more recently, Resident Evil Village. Guns up. The inventory in Resident Evil has always felt like a little mini puzzle of its own, at least since Resident Evil 4. But even before the modern inventory system, various characters would have different inventory slot amounts, with the ladies often being able to carry more, which hilariously implies that they're just better at organizing and packing than the guys. Another absolutely hilarious fact is how 8 keys and small items take up about the same space as a whole arsenal. I love you, Resident Evil inventory. A lot of fans generally agree that the older Resident Evil games had it all. Atmosphere, horror, tension, delicious exploration, and riveting storylines. But one thing we can all agree on is that Resident Evil isn't very generous with bathrooms. In RE1, the Spencer mansion has one whole toilet. At least he had some common sense to provide the live-in staff with their own lavatories in the living quarters. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 suffer from the same thing. Not a bathroom in sight. Imagine working for Umbrella or the Raccoon Police. Ah, hang on, Tim. I gotta take a leak. Sure, don't forget the 2 keys, 3 crests, and 8 statues you have to push to access it. Also, I think Paul and Andy went before you, man. Earlier Resident Evil games seemed to have a thing for trap rooms that release poison gas, or as I like to call them, fart gas rooms. RE1 has 2, one with the armored statues needing to cover the vents in order to acquire a crest, and one later on in the lab that involves covering events with boxes. RE0 has a human-sized chessboard, and CVX has a gas trap room in the basement of the doctor's lair, as well as later on in Antarctica, where an entire area fills up with poisonous gas. Come to think of it, Resident Evil 7's DLC Not a Hero also has a whole area that ends up filling up with gas. You know what? I miss these fart gas rooms, and I hope they make a return in future installments. Have you ever noticed how the saving devices in the games always seem to be a couple of generations behind current technology? During the 90s, it was typewriters. For more recent RE games, the save points have evolved into tape recorders. Still a few generations behind, but evolving. Maybe in time for Resident Evil 15, it'll eventually be a DVD player. Okay, so let's talk about the zombies. They're clearly a staple enemy of the series, which centers around the idea of manufacturing bioweapons to be used in warfare and high-profile assassinations, and also selling viruses as products on the black market for incredible profit. But the zombies, they're not exactly Umbrella's intended product. The Tnt Virus, as we know, stands for Tyrant, a unique and powerful but extremely rare mutation that would only occur in about 1 in every 10 million people. If you're trying to conduct secret, highly illegal, and immoral research, abducting 10 million people just to create one of these bad boys is not very efficient. In short, and skipping some of the more detailed lore behind the effects of the T-Virus once it's shown to be incompatible with its host, zombies are just a byproduct. They're slow. They lack strength, intelligence, and coordination, and they're literally falling apart, driven only by the very basic of instincts, to feed. Still, with all of that being said, zombies always seem to leave a catastrophe in their wake. And yes, I'm referring to the Raccoon City incident for one. Umbrella spent a ridiculous amount of time, money, and resources to try to perfect the T-Virus, or create new viruses altogether. If you ask me, the zombies, their biggest failure and simple waste product, was more than enough to achieve their intended goal of creating a highly potent and efficient bioweapon that could eliminate large clusters of people and leave destruction in its wake. Let's move on to the more character-specific facts, shall we? Leon S. Kennedy, Resident Evil's poster boy. The name and face everyone knows, even outside of the fandom. Besides seemingly always having immaculate hair and being saved last minute by the in the red dress, not to mention his back and forth cat and mouse relationship with Ada, Leon has another reoccurring theme attached to him. He absolutely cannot and should not drive vehicles. Ever since RE2, things always seem to go wrong when this man gets anywhere near a vehicle. Okay, maybe RE2 was just a one-time thing since he was a nervous rookie, you might think. Nope. It happened again. And again. And again. Leon, please, for the love of all that is holy, let someone else drive.
Don't shoot! Get down!
Leon has been a bit of an inconsistent character throughout the series, and no, I'm not talking about his serious rookie demeanor in RE2 evolving into the devil may care B-movie action hero attitude in RE4. That's perfectly natural. He's evolved as a character.
Your right hand comes off?
But from here on out, it gets a bit weird. In the movie Degeneration, which takes place after the events of Resident Evil 4, Leon is acting more somber, almost a bit gloomy. In Resident Evil Damnation, Leon is once more back to his cheery self, cracking jokes and one-liners.
Looks like they're doing some serious renovations down here. Come on, don't be shy.
Fast forward to RE6, taking place only a few months after Damnation, Leon is again acting battle-hardened, morose, and fed up with it all.
Let's get the hell out of here. It's gonna be a tough road.
Vendetta, coming in approximately 5 years after RE6, shows Leon being, frankly, a mix of both. Only this time, he's taken on Chris's heavy drinking, a habit that Chris picked up on in Resident Evil 6. So in Vendetta, it's almost as if Chris and Leon briefly swap personalities, with Chris giving Leon the old pep talk instead of vice versa. But in conclusion, both Leon and Chris have endured excruciating losses, and they're both very demoralized and emotionally drained, so it's pointless to compare who's been through more. Maybe this strange personality swap is just a dynamic of two good friends holding each other up when it matters the most. Moving on to Claire, everyone's favorite rebel biker chick, and my personal favorite. Literally every single Resident Evil fan knows this one, so let's just get it over with. Yes, her Made in Heaven and Let Me Live logos on her vests are indeed references to Queen songs. And yes, her brother Chris has matching jackets with the same logos. Badass. Moving on. In RE2, Claire exudes confidence, bravery, and abundant protection of Sherry, an innocent child who's been caught up in this nightmare. Ah, kids. You can't take your eyes off of them for a second or they'll be flushed down a sewage drain. This moment added heaps of tension when we all played Resident Evil 2 the first time. But nowadays, I mostly laugh at the scene if I'm honest. Unfortunately, this moment set a precedent for future portrayals of Claire as being bad with kids, as we see here in Revelations 2.
Did that lady put you here? Where are you?
Whoa, down, Claire. Let me talk to her. You must be so scared.
Come on! It was just a one-time slip-up. Claire's great with kids. Mostly. Another Claire-esque thing that happens across several entries is this. Coincidence? Or a reference to the fact that she may have previously been incarcerated at some point outside of the RE plotline? Let me hear your thoughts. Last but not least, Claire seems to have a very bad luck with male friends and potential love interests, as they always seem to end up infected. Bad guys. Or both. On to Chris Redfield, everyone's favorite overprotective brother and captain. Let's start off small. One of the more obvious things I'm sure you may have noticed is the lighter he's always toting around in the earlier Resident Evil games. RE1 portrays Chris as being a smoker, but this is actually the only time we canonically see him smoke. Chris starts off CVX without the lighter and ends up getting it back depending on whether Claire gives Rodrigo the hemostat. If you do, a cutscene plays out where Claire remarks that the lighter was a gift from Chris. A personal theory that I have just a theory, guys, don't crucify me, is that Chris may have given her the lighter just after the events of RE1, and right before leaving Raccoon City, not mentioning a word about the mansion incident. He probably felt that the lighter was a lucky charm that had kept him safe throughout the mansion ordeals, and that it would do the same for Claire. It's also entirely possible that they just had identical lighters, much like the jackets and combat knives. Let me know what you guys think. If you think Chris's relationship with boulders started with Resident Evil 5, you are wrong. In fact, we can follow his evolution and anti-boulder techniques all the way from Resident Evil 1, where he's seen running from a boulder, to CVX, where he's seen scaling a boulder. Bear with me here, I know it's a cliff. To Resident Evil 5, where we finally see him punching one. Now that's some character development. For this next one, I just have to note that these are just a couple of quick observations about Chris, and it's not really in-depth. I'll be going into more detail about this in future videos. Chris doesn't exactly seem to have any issues rebelling against any authorities. In the Air Force, which leads to his suspension, and also against Irons. Taking issue with peers questioning his commands while having rebelled against leaders himself.
I said, our mission is to terminate the VOWs.
On the topic of Chris, if you pay attention across several games, mainly Resident Evil 1, Code Veronica, and Lost in Nightmares, you can see how the rivalry between Chris and Wesker deepens. I'll cover this more in another separate video though. And we can't forget about everyone's favorite Valentine. One very peculiar thing that Jill is often exposed to is her tendency to get infected with viruses, often getting cured in the nick of time. Resident Evil 3 is a perfect example, where she barely manages to survive a particularly aggressive T virus strain, as she is infected by the Nemesis. Revelations 1 is another example, where she has to vaccinate herself against T Abyss. Last but not least, Resident Evil 5, where she is injected with P-30, a mind control substance which Wesker uses to enslave her for years. It's no wonder the poor woman needs a break. Have you noticed how Jill always has the same idle animation? We see this in Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 3, and even in the Resident Evil 20th anniversary artwork. In the earlier Resident Evil games, it was really common for characters to have certain items or traits based on their gender. In Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 respectively, Jill and Claire both had lockpicks. They both were able to carry more items. Better at packing, I'm telling you. They both had a smaller character hitbox, making it easier to dodge enemies, but they also were able to take less damage due to a smaller health pool. Same with the fellas. Chris and Leon both had lighters, which made them have to search for small keys as they were not able to open certain doors and drawers. Both were able to carry less items, but both were able to also take more damage due to a larger health pool, but they were also a bit clunkier to move with due to a larger hitbox. In Chris's case, he would often need Rebecca's help in order to do various puzzles, while Leon needed Ada. Interestingly, CVX features a mix of both systems, but depending on your actions, you could end up with either a lighter or the lockpick, which was a very fresh take. While this gender-based system is a really archaic take on a game mechanic for today's standards, it was interesting back in the day because it added a bit more depth to each scenario. You just can't have good without some evil, right? The stars, BSAA, Terra Save, they're all dedicated to fighting bioterror in one way or another. But do you know what they also all have in common? All of them are actually funded by a company responsible for bioweapon manufacturing. So, Umbrella helped fund and sponsor the STARS team's fancy equipment, including the very weapons they killed bioweapons with. Even though this one is dead obvious, I had to include it. Otherwise people would leave comments like, "Cat, how did you not put this in? Oh my god, you're such a fake fan." Anyway, pursuer-type enemies. Though Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 are specifically designed around the idea of a towering, violent creature chasing you through narrow corridors, wanting nothing more than to smush your head in, these stalkers do frequently appear throughout the entire series. Whether it's an homage to older pursuers or a boss fight, these encounters will have you looking over your shoulders non-stop. So, disregarding RE2 and RE3 here, Resident Evil 0, with the prototype tyrant coming back for round 2, implying it was following Rebecca all along. CVX has the training tyrant following Claire and Steve onto the plane after a ground encounter. But CVX also has a second homage to tyrants when Alexia rises from the ground after being defeated by Chris the first time. Very similar to RE2. Moving on to RE4, which has the Verdugo and U3. Though both of them are boss fights, they're still based on the premise of being stalked. Also, have you noticed any similarities between this guy and this guy? Yeah, I thought so. Resident Evil 6 gives us double pursuer trouble with the Ustanak, meaning rising in Serbian, following Sherry and Jake. The Ubistvo, meaning murder in Serbian, following Ada, and crossing paths again later with Jake and Sherry. Revelations 1 has Rachel, one of my personal favorites, who repeatedly stalks Jill and Parker through the Queen Zenobia and can squeeze in virtually anywhere. Revelations 2 has Pedro, who I suppose was rather short-lived as a pursuer. Resident Evil 7 obviously has Jack Baker, who loves to perpetually expand his family.
Welcome to the family, son.
And Resident Evil Village, of course, has her.
All this for a child?
What the hell do...
You ungrateful, selfish wretch!
Suffice to say that the horror trope of resilient creatures who come back time and time again isn't going anywhere. We've talked about zombies, now let's talk about viruses. Resident Evil features a plethora of various viruses and pathogens. The Tnt Virus alone has so many different strains, Epsilon and VACT being a couple of examples. Add to this T. Veronica, and a marine-based one, T. Abyss. You can see how things get a little bit wild. A lot of these viruses frequently reoccur in the series, often with one virus being grafted onto another, like T. Phobos or Ouroboros, for example. Disregarding the lore here for a second, it's interesting to think about how each virus also helps justify a new enemy variant or even contextualize gameplay and more technical game elements. In-game lore and world building should absolutely not be discredited, but we have to remember that sometimes a new virus may just be a tool for the game to just make sense. Vast as Resident Evil lore may be, ultimately, Resident Evil is a game, and that comes before anything else. Sewers. I wouldn't be caught dead going into them without a hazmat suit at least, and yet our dear protagonists repeatedly find themselves wading knee-deep into them. From Resident Evil 2,
That's a pleasant smell.
Resident Evil 3, Survivor, RE4, RE5, RE6, Revelations 2. Need I continue? Sewers have become a commonplace location for many Resident Evil games, and I don't think that's about to change. What's their fascination with sewers anyway? And last but not least, have you ever noticed how the action-era Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 5, Revelations 1, Revelations 2, all have one thing in common? They all share a very similar story premise, in which someone working for a good organization, the BSAA, Tricell, or TerraSave, unleashes a viral outbreak in order to justify said organization's existence and improve its funding. The themes of "Are you willing to be evil to do good?" are very strong within these games. And that concludes the list. I really hope you guys enjoyed. Did you find the 2 hidden Easter eggs in the video, by the way? Leave a comment below and let me know. If you want to see more of these types of videos, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, follow me on social media, all links in the description below, and just let me know what you thought in general. Every little bit helps in supporting this channel. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, take care.